Hey man, silence is not just the absence of words, it is the presence of something far heavier. When a man goes silent, he strips away the woman's ability to control the narrative, to twist arguments, or to pull him into her emotional chaos. Anger can be dismissed as overreaction, brushed aside as immaturity, or even manipulated into making the man look guilty. But silence cannot be redirected, it cannot be reframed. It hangs in the air like a mirror, forcing her to sit with her own actions and her own guilt. Women crave emotional engagement, whether positive or negative, because engagement means she still has your attention. When you yell, when you argue, when you fight, she knows she still matters. But when you go silent, she feels invisible, she feels powerless, and nothing crushes her ego more than the realization that the man she once thought she could control has now chosen not to respond at all. Anger burns quickly, like fire. It's intense, but it eventually dies down. Silence, however, is like ice. It lingers, it numbs, and it spreads slowly into every corner of her mind. When a man responds with anger, she can feed on it, because it keeps her at the center of his world. It tells her that his emotions are still tied to her actions, that she has the power to provoke him. But silence robs her of that validation. It communicates in a language more devastating than any outburst. You no longer affect me. That message is unbearable for a woman who thrives on emotional influence. It forces her to confront the terrifying thought that she no longer holds the same place in his heart, that her ability to shape his moods has been cut off at the root. Silence tells her what anger never could, that he has already moved on in his mind. The reason silence hurts more than anger is that anger gives her something to fight against, but silence leaves her battling herself. When a man yells, she can counter with excuses, tears, or blame shifting. She can redirect the attention away from her shortcomings and back onto his tone, his delivery, or his temper. But when he says nothing, she has no battlefield to manipulate. She has no enemy to argue with. She is forced to sit alone with the weight of her own conscience. That stillness is deafening. It amplifies every mistake she made, every betrayal, every disrespect. And because there's no verbal outlet to release that tension, it builds into anxiety, paranoia, and regret. Silence forces her to do what anger never could. It makes her self-reflect, and that reflection, even if she never admits it, is what begins to break her from within. Women often mistake a man's silence for indifference, but in truth, it is a demonstration of control. Any man can lash out, but it takes real strength to remain composed when provoked. That composure communicates something far deeper than rage. It says, I am not yours to manipulate. Silence is not weakness, it is discipline. It is the ability to walk away from chaos without carrying it inside you, and that discipline unsettles women because it reveals that she no longer has the power to pull you into her storm. While anger keeps you tethered to her energy, silence severs the rope completely. She can scream, she can cry, she can throw accusations, but none of it penetrates the wall of stillness you've built. And that quiet indifference, that calm refusal to engage, creates more fear in her than 1,000 angry words ever could. What women don't realize is that silence isn't just about withholding words, it's about shifting focus. When a man goes silent, he isn't simply ignoring her, he is redirecting his energy back into himself. He invests in his growth, his purpose, his peace. And while she's left spiraling in confusion, wondering why her usual tactics no longer work, he's building a world where she no longer has a say. That contrast is what destroys her. Because deep down, she knows anger means he's still trapped in the cycle with her, but silence means he's free. It means she's no longer the center of his universe. And for a woman who thrives on being desired, prioritized, and chased, that realization is devastating. It cuts deeper than rejection, deeper than betrayal, because silence isn't just a punishment, it's a declaration of independence. It says, my life moves forward with or without you. Silence is devastating because it creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is the one thing women cannot tolerate for long. Anger is predictable. It has a beginning, a climax, and eventually an end. She knows that once the storm passes, things will return to normal, but silence has no clear ending. She doesn't know if you're gone for a day, a week, or forever. That ambiguity gnaws at her because it strips away control. It leaves her replaying past conversations, searching for clues, and questioning her own value. Every unanswered text becomes a wound. Every moment of stillness becomes a reminder that she is no longer dictating the rhythm of your connection. In that vacuum, her mind spirals, and the silence becomes louder than any shouted word could ever be. The psychology behind silence is simple but brutal. Human beings crave certainty more than comfort. Women in particular lean heavily on emotional consistency. When they know where they stand, even if it's bad, they feel secure. Anger ironically provides that security, because it proves she still matters enough to provoke you, but silence removes the ground beneath her feet. She can't read it, can't predict it, can't manipulate it, and that lack of clarity forces her to confront her deepest fear, that she's no longer important to you. Silence doesn't just hurt because it withholds words, it hurts because it dismantles her sense of identity within the relationship. If she doesn't affect you anymore, who is she to you? That unanswered question lingers in her chest, like a weight she can't shake. The power of silence also comes from what it represents: emotional detachment. When a man goes silent, he is no longer entangled in the highs and lows of her emotions. He is showing her, without saying it, that he has reclaimed his energy, and energy is what women crave more than anything. The attention, the affection, the validation, the focus. When you're silent, you take all of that back and redirect it toward yourself. That's why she feels it so intensely. She doesn't miss your words. She misses the spotlight you used to shine on her. She doesn't long for the arguments. She longs for the confirmation that she was still the center of your emotional world. Silence starves her of that validation, and for a woman who thrives on being wanted, that starvation is unbearable. Another reason silence cuts deeper than anger is because it leaves her exposed. In arguments, she can weaponize words, twisting them, reframing them, making you the villain even when she was at fault. But when you go quiet, you rob her of the canvas on which to paint her excuses. She can't accuse you of shouting, can't claim you disrespected her, can't hide behind dramatics. She is forced to face the reality that the distance isn't created by noise, it's created by her own actions. Silence exposes the truth she doesn't want to confront, that you've stopped playing her game. And when the game ends, the mask falls. Without your emotional reactions to shield her, she is left with only her reflection. And often, that reflection is what terrifies her most. This is why silence is not passive, it's active power. It says everything without saying a word. It communicates boundaries, strength, and self-control. It shows her that you refuse to trade your peace for pointless drama. And while she may call you cold, distant, or unfeeling, deep down she knows the truth. Silence is what proves your strength. Any man can explode, any man can argue, but few men can walk away, sit in stillness, and let silence do the talking. That restraint unsettles her because it proves you're not trapped in her emotional orbit anymore. You've broken free. And once a man learns how to wield silence correctly, he realizes that it is not weakness, it is the most powerful response he could ever give. Silence becomes even more powerful when it follows a history of emotional engagement. Think about it. If a man has always been responsive, always quick to text back, always ready to talk through conflict, then suddenly withdraws into silence, the contrast is shocking. It's not just the absence of words, it's the collapse of a pattern she had grown used to. That sudden void magnifies the effect. It makes her feel like she's falling into a space where nothing makes sense anymore. And in that confusion, she begins to realize the strength of the man she thought she had fully figured out. Anger might flare and fade, but silence lingers, leaving her replaying every memory, every conversation, trying to piece together when she lost her grip on him. This shift also exposes a truth most women don't want to admit. They depend on a man's emotional responses more than they realize. When she gets a reaction, whether it's love, frustration, or even rage, it tells her she still has influence. She feeds on that connection, even when it's toxic. But when silence replaces reaction, she is cut off from the fuel she secretly relies on. That's why silence isn't just about ignoring her, it's about starving the cycle of emotional manipulation. She suddenly has nothing to grab onto, no way to pull you back into her orbit. The man who once reacted now stands firm and unmoved, and the more he resists, the more she crumbles under the weight of her own need for validation. What makes silence different from anger is that it communicates finality. Anger can feel like part of the game, an explosion followed by reconciliation. Couples fight and make up all the time, so anger becomes part of a cycle she can predict. But silence breaks that cycle. It introduces the possibility that things won't return to how they were. Silence carries an unspoken message: I don't need to play this game anymore. That thought terrifies her because it signals that the balance of power has shifted. She is no longer the one dictating when the connection begins or ends. The man has taken back control, and in doing so, he forces her to reckon with a possibility she had never prepared for, that she may have lost him for good. Another reason silence hurts more than anger is because it removes her ability to frame herself as the victim. When you argue, she can point fingers at your tone, your volume, or the way you lost your cool. She can redirect the focus away from her behavior and onto yours, but silence gives her nothing to work with. There are no harsh words to accuse you of, no raised voice to point at. There is only absence, and absence can't be blamed on you. It points directly back to her actions. That's why silence cuts so deep. It exposes her role in creating the very distance she now despises. She may try to label you as cold, but deep down she knows you're not punishing her, you're protecting yourself. This is why silence works in ways anger never could. It doesn't escalate, it de-escalates. But in doing so, it shifts all the emotional weight back onto her. Silence is not a weapon in the traditional sense, it's a boundary. It says, I will not participate in chaos. It says, I value my peace more than your validation. And that shift of priorities changes everything. Women are used to men placing them at the center of their emotional world. But when you step back into silence, you show her that your center is your own stability, your own focus, your own discipline. And nothing unsettles her more than realizing she no longer controls the man who once gave her that power freely. Silence also has a way of magnifying the very things she thought she could escape. When you argue, the noise distracts her. She focuses on your tone or the heat of the moment rather than the actual problem. But when you go silent, the mirror is turned back on her. Every disrespectful word she spoke, every selfish choice she made, every game she played, suddenly it echoes louder than ever, because nothing is drowning it out. Silence forces her to sit in the truth she wanted to avoid. It becomes impossible to deflect blame, because your calm absence highlights her chaos more clearly than any argument could. In that stillness, she begins to feel the weight of accountability, even if she never says it out loud. And here's the irony. While silence hurts her, it also commands her respect. Deep down, women don't admire the men they can manipulate. They test and push because they want to see where the line is. When a man erupts in anger, it shows her she still controls his emotions. But when a man stays silent, refuses to engage in petty battles, and withdraws his energy, that reveals strength she can't ignore. Even if she hates it in the moment, she respects it because it shows her a man who values himself enough not to be dragged into drama. And in the psychology of attraction, respect always precedes love. Without respect, affection fades. But when she sees that you cannot be shaken, a part of her will always remember you as different from the rest. Another dimension of silence is its ability to create space. In that space, she begins to feel the absence of your presence. At first, she may convince herself she doesn't care, that your quiet is weakness, that she can replace you. But as the hours turn into days, the silence grows heavier. She scrolls through old messages, replays old conversations, even imagines your voice in her head. That void you leave behind becomes unbearable because it forces her to realize the comfort your presence once gave her. Silence is not just emptiness, it's contrast. It reminds her of everything she lost by pushing you away. And no amount of external distraction can fully cover that void because silence is louder than attention from anyone else. Silence also dismantles her strategies for control. Many women rely on emotional escalation as a way of keeping the upper hand. They cry, argue, guilt trip, or even stonewall, all in an attempt to provoke a reaction. But when your reaction is no reaction, her entire playbook collapses. It leaves her scrambling for a way to get you back into the emotional ring. That desperation begins to show in subtle ways. Texts that come out of nowhere, sudden attempts at kindness, or even picking fights just to get you talking. The silence breaks her rhythm, and in that break, she loses the control she thought she had over you. That's why silence is not passive, it's active disruption. It ends her game without you having to announce a single rule. Ultimately, silence hurts more than anger because it points to the deepest truth. You no longer need her to validate you. Anger still ties you to her, but silence frees you. It communicates that you are centered in yourself, focused on your own world, and unwilling to be pulled into unnecessary chaos. That kind of independence is rare, and it unsettles women because it shifts the balance of power completely. She can't influence what she can't reach, she can't control what she can't shake, and in that realization, she begins to feel the loss, not of a man who argued with her, but of a man who refused to let her dictate his emotions. That loss, once it sinks in, is what makes silence the most powerful response a man can ever give. Silence also transforms the dynamic because it reveals who is truly invested. Anger, shouting, or arguing can create the illusion of passion on both sides, but silence strips away that mask. When you step back into quiet resolve, you can observe her response with clarity. Does she reach out to repair the connection? Does she reflect on her behavior? Or does she retreat, hoping you'll eventually break the silence first? The answers to these questions tell you everything you need to know about her character. In many cases, women who are used to manipulating men can't withstand silence because it forces them to either take accountability or walk away. And if she walks, then silence saved you time. If she steps up, then silence revealed a strength that anger never could. Either way, the truth surfaces because silence has a way of revealing what words often hide. It's important to understand that silence is not about punishment, it's about self-preservation. Men who master silence don't do it to hurt women, but to protect their peace. They recognize that constantly engaging in drama drains their energy and erodes their masculinity. By choosing silence, they choose discipline over chaos, self-respect over validation, growth over stagnation. And ironically, this self-preservation often becomes the very thing that makes women chase harder. Because women are not used to men who set unbreakable boundaries. They are used to men who can be poked, prodded, and provoked into reacting. When you refuse to play that game, you not only keep your peace, you also elevate yourself in her eyes, because you show her a type of strength that cannot be faked. The longer your silence continues, the more it transforms her perception of you. At first, she might dismiss it as a phase, then she grows restless. Eventually, she begins to wonder if she ever truly knew you at all. That mystery unsettles her, because women crave emotional certainty. They want to know where they stand, what you feel, and how much power they still hold over you. But silence clouds all of that. It creates distance she can't measure, and in that distance, her imagination takes over. She wonders if you've moved on, if you've found someone else, if you've outgrown her. Those unanswered questions haunt her more than any angry confrontation could, because anger can be explained, but silence has no explanation. It forces her to fill in the blanks, and her imagination is always crueler than reality. Another reason silence devastates women is because it reflects strength in areas most men lack. In a culture where men are constantly told to communicate, to over-explain, to prove themselves, silence becomes radical. It shows that you don't need to justify yourself, that you don't need to prove your point, that you don't need to plead for understanding. You're willing to let your actions and your absence speak louder than your words. This unsettles her because it goes against everything she's accustomed to. Most men fold under the pressure of her emotions, but you don't. Most men seek closure through conversation, but you find it in silence. That difference makes her question not just you, but herself. And in that questioning, the balance of power shifts permanently. At the core of it all, silence hurts more than anger, because it speaks the truth women least want to hear, that their influence over you is gone. Anger says, you still matter enough to provoke me. Silence says, you no longer control my peace. And that message, even without words, is devastating. It lingers long after the moment passes. She will replay it, resist it, and resent it, but she will never forget it. Because in the psychology of attraction, silence is not emptiness, it is strength. It's the sound of a man who refuses to be ruled by anyone else's emotions. And once you learn to wield that silence, you'll realize that it's not just a tactic, it's a lifestyle. A lifestyle where your peace is sacred, your standards are firm, and no woman's chaos can ever drown out your clarity again. The outro is where the weight of silence should echo loudest, because it ties everything back to the lesson, control. When a man finally learns that silence is his sharpest weapon, he stops wasting his energy on shouting matches and emotional roller coasters. He no longer burns himself out trying to be understood, because he realizes women aren't confused by accident, they thrive in confusion. What crushes them isn't your explanation, it's your refusal to explain. What shakes them isn't your anger, it's your ability to withhold it. That's why silence lingers in their hearts long after anger fades. It leaves them with no script, no story, no shield. It forces them to feel the absence of your energy, and that absence is what changes everything. Imagine this, she storms out of the room, expecting you to follow, expecting the fight to escalate. Instead, you stay seated. Hours later, she sends you a text meant to spark a reaction, but you don't respond. By morning, she's scrolling through your social media, searching for signs of your attention, wondering if she's losing her grip. That spiral wasn't caused by harsh words, it was caused by silence. And the more you practice silence, the stronger its effect becomes, because she'll start to anticipate it, fear it, and respect it. She'll realize that the man who doesn't yell, doesn't argue, and doesn't beg is the man she cannot control. And that realization will shift the entire dynamic of the relationship. The real power of silence lies in its simplicity. You don't need clever words, elaborate strategies, or dramatic exits. You just need discipline. Discipline to hold back when your pride wants to defend itself. Discipline to stay calm when your emotions want to explode. Discipline to walk away instead of engaging in games. That discipline is rare, and rare is respected. Women might call it cold or detached, but deep down, they crave it. Because in a world full of men who react to every stimulus, the man who stays silent becomes unforgettable. He becomes the one she compares every other man to. Not because he gave her more, but because he refused to give himself away so cheaply. But let's be clear, silence isn't about ignoring her forever or stonewalling without purpose. It's about choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, strength over weakness. It's about sending a message that you will not be pulled into battles that drain you. You're not withholding because you're petty, you're withholding because you're protecting your energy. And that distinction matters, because when silence is grounded in self-respect, it doesn't just hurt her, it heals you. It reminds you that your voice, your time, and your emotions are valuable. And the moment you realize that, you stop giving them away recklessly. That shift doesn't just change your relationships, it changes your life. So remember this. Anger is noise, but silence is power. Anger fades quickly, but silence echoes for years. Anger gives her something to fight against, but silence forces her to fight with herself. And when the dust settles, she will remember the man who didn't shout, didn't beg, and didn't break. She will remember the silence, because silence is the one thing she cannot spin, cannot dismiss, and cannot escape. And that's why silence, more than anything else, is the language of strength. It is the voice of a man who knows his worth. And once you master it, you'll never need to prove yourself to anyone again. The silence of a man doesn't just disturb a woman in the moment, it seeps into her long-term memory in a way anger never could. Anger is emotional noise, it's chaotic, loud, and fleeting. She might remember the sting of your words for a while, but over time she'll reframe them, twist them, and even convince herself you are in the wrong. Silence, on the other hand, can't be rewritten. There's no text to reinterpret, no tone to criticize, no word to hold against you. It's a blank space that she fills with her own fears, doubts, and regrets. And the more she thinks about it, the more she realizes she was fighting shadows of her own making. That's the beauty of silence. It doesn't give her ammunition, it gives her reflection. And the reflection is what tears her apart, because it reveals just how much power she lost the moment you stop reacting. What makes silence particularly destructive is the way it disrupts her emotional rhythm. Relationships with emotionally reactive men tend to follow a predictable cycle. Tension builds, conflict erupts, anger is expressed, apologies are made, and the bond is reset. This loop, while toxic, still provides consistency. She knows how to play the game because she knows when to provoke and when to soothe. But silence breaks the cycle entirely. When she lashes out and receives nothing in return, she loses her script. She doesn't know what comes next. That disruption feels like losing control of the steering wheel at high speed. It triggers panic, and in that panic, she begins to overthink, overreach, and overexpose herself. The man who stays silent forces her into the most uncomfortable position possible, one where her instincts no longer work. Silence also carries a kind of dignity that anger never can. Anger often lowers a man, making him appear emotional, irrational, and easily provoked. Women may not admit it, but they lose respect when a man consistently erupts in rage. Silence, however, elevates a man. It makes him appear calm, composed, and in control, even if inside he's wrestling with fire. That composure communicates strength, not because he doesn't feel anything, but because he refuses to be ruled by what he feels. And women, whether they acknowledge it or not, are deeply attracted to this quality. They test men precisely to see if they can be broken. But when you remain silent in the face of provocation, you prove something few men can, that you're unshakable, that quiet confidence leaves a mark, that words never could. Another hidden power of silence is that it buys you time. Anger pushes you into immediate reaction, often saying things you don't mean or making decisions you'll regret. Silence, however, creates space. space to think, to observe, to strategize, and in that space, you often realize that many battles aren't even worth fighting. The issues that seemed urgent in the heat of emotion suddenly shrink in importance when met with calm reflection. This frustrates women because they depend on urgency. They want immediate reaction, immediate reassurance, immediate conflict resolution on their terms. By staying silent, you deny her that urgency. You move at your own pace, not hers, and that pace forces her to either slow down and reflect or exhaust herself fighting a battle you've already walked away from. But perhaps the deepest reason silence hurts women more than anger is because silence represents indifference, and indifference is the opposite of love. You can love a man and still fight with him. You can be angry with someone because you care. But when silence takes over, it signals something far more threatening: detachment. It says, you no longer occupy my emotional space. For a woman, that's devastating. It doesn't just make her feel unwanted, it makes her feel irrelevant. And irrelevance is a wound far deeper than rejection, because rejection at least acknowledges her presence, but silence erases it altogether. She doesn't just feel unloved, she feels invisible, and once a man makes her feel invisible, she will forever remember the power of that silence. Silence also shifts the battlefield from external noise to internal war. When you argue, the battle is between you and her, your words against hers, your perspective against her narrative. But when you go silent, you remove yourself from the conflict entirely, and she's left to fight within her own mind. And that's a fight she cannot win, because when she has no words from you to twist, no tone to criticize, no actions to react to, all she has left are her own choices. Every disrespect, every betrayal, every moment she crossed the line, it all comes back to her in the quiet. And that is far more painful than anything you could have yelled, because anger puts you on trial, silence puts her on trial. And the courtroom is inside her own head, where the evidence of her mistakes plays on repeat. One of the most underestimated aspects of silence is its unpredictability. With anger, she knows what to expect: shouting, accusations, maybe even slamming doors. But silence keeps her guessing. Is he done with me? Has he lost interest? Is he planning to leave? That uncertainty eats away at her, because it gives her no sense of control. And women crave control in relationships, especially emotional control. When she doesn't know where she stands, her mind fills in the blanks with worst-case scenarios, and that torment is often more destructive than the truth itself. Silence works not because it punishes her, but because it forces her to live in the unknown. And for someone who survives on emotional certainty, the unknown is unbearable. Silence also separates the men from the boys. Most men, when confronted with disrespect or betrayal, lash out impulsively. They raise their voices, they try to force understanding, they beg to be heard. But the man who chooses silence, he demonstrates mastery over himself. He shows he doesn't need to be understood because he already understands himself. He doesn't need to prove his point because he knows his point is valid. That quiet mastery makes him stand out from the rest. It makes her realize she can't reduce him to the same level of chaos she's used to. And that realization shifts the power dynamic permanently, because the moment she sees you won't break under pressure, she knows you're not like the others, and that terrifies her just as much as it attracts her. What women often forget is that silence isn't just absence, it's presence turned inward. It's a man saying, instead of giving my energy to you, I'm giving it back to myself. And that act of self-prioritization is what shakes her most, because it shows her she's no longer the center of your world. Your focus has shifted to your goals, your peace, your growth. She's no longer the source of your validation because you've built that validation from within. And for a woman who's used to men orbiting around her emotions, that shift feels like abandonment. But in truth, it's not abandonment, it's liberation. You've liberated yourself from her control, and in doing so, you've forced her to realize the truth. She was never your anchor. You were always your own. And here's the ultimate irony: the silence she hates the most is often the silence she secretly respects. She may call it cold, she may label it cruel, but deep down she recognizes it as strength. Because every woman knows the difference between a man who can be rattled and a man who cannot. And while she might resist it, test it, or even flee from it, she will never forget it. The man who argues fades into memory as just another reactive partner. The man who stays silent becomes the standard she measures others against. Because silence isn't just a response, it's a revelation. It reveals who you are, what you value, and what you refuse to tolerate. And once a woman experiences that kind of silence, she knows she's dealing with a man who cannot be broken. Silence is devastating because it forces her to live without closure. Anger, no matter how destructive, always comes with an ending. You argue, it peaks, and eventually someone apologizes or storms off. There's a conclusion, even if it's messy. Silence denies her that. It leaves the story unfinished, the door half open, the question unanswered, and that lack of closure creates a haunting effect. Days later, weeks later, she's still replaying what you didn't say, still wondering why you chose not to respond. That uncertainty lingers longer than any shouted words ever could, because silence becomes a question mark she can't erase. It's not the noise of your anger that echoes in her head, it's the emptiness of your absence, and that emptiness grows louder every day she fails to fill it. The silence of a man also destroys her ego because it exposes her dependence on validation. Most women won't admit it, but they thrive on knowing they can provoke a reaction. Even if it's anger, it tells them they matter. But when your silence communicates that you've detached emotionally, she realizes she's lost the one thing she counted on, your attention. That loss cuts deeper than rejection, because rejection can be rationalized. She can tell herself you were wrong for her, or you didn't see her worth. But silence gives her no such comfort. It doesn't even give her a reason. It simply shows her that you no longer need her energy in your life, and that lack of explanation gnaws at her ego more than 1,000 rejections could. Silence is also timeless in a way. Anger never is. Anger is tied to the moment. It's fueled by what just happened. But silence transcends the moment. It stretches into the future, carrying its weight long after the incident is over. She might think she's moved on, but months later, she'll still remember the way you didn't respond, the way you didn't chase, the way you didn't break. That memory haunts her because it reminds her of something she rarely encounters, a man with control. Every time she meets another man who reacts emotionally, she'll remember the one who didn't, and that comparison will remind her of the silence she couldn't conquer. In that way, your silence becomes eternal, while your anger would have been forgotten. Perhaps the greatest strength of silence is that it keeps the frame firmly in your hands. Anger shifts the frame to her. It gives her the chance to accuse, to play victim, to twist the story. But silence leaves no story to twist. It keeps the frame with you because you never lost composure, never left your position, never surrendered your calm. That's why silence is the mark of a man in control. It doesn't just protect your peace, it protects your power. And women, deep down, crave men who keep their frame. They may resist it in the moment, but they can't deny the respect it commands. Silence forces her to recognize that you won't bend just to keep her happy, and that recognition either transforms her behavior or drives her away. Either outcome is a victory for you. In the end, silence is the loudest language of strength a man can speak. It communicates boundaries without hostility, distance without bitterness, power without aggression. It hurts women more than anger ever could because it deprives them of control, denies them closure, and dismantles their illusions. But most importantly, it frees you. It frees you from cycles of drama, from battles that drain your energy, from the need to prove yourself. And in that freedom, you rediscover what matters most: your peace, your purpose, your self-respect. That's why silence will always be feared, respected, and remembered, because while anger shouts in the moment, silence whispers forever. Silence also has the ability to flip the dynamic of pursuit. When you argue or beg, she knows you are the one invested in keeping the connection alive. But when you withdraw into silence, the roles reverse. Suddenly, she's the one left questioning, doubting, wondering if she lost something she thought she controlled. That reversal is disorienting because it exposes her dependency on your presence. A woman who once felt secure in your pursuit now feels the sting of chasing shadows. She sends messages that go unanswered, tries to provoke a reaction that never comes, and finds herself obsessing over the very man she thought she could discard. In this way, silence not only removes you from her games, but also forces her to play them alone. What silence truly highlights is the difference between emotional power and emotional discipline. Women, by nature, are more emotionally expressive. They win by pulling others into their emotional storms. Men, however, are at their strongest when they resist that pull. When you stay silent, you're not just avoiding an argument, you're demonstrating mastery of yourself. That discipline sends a message louder than shouting ever could. My emotions belong to me, not to you. That declaration of independence terrifies her because it proves she cannot sway you with moods, manipulation, or chaos. And the irony is that while she may hate it in the moment, she will always respect it in hindsight, because discipline, unlike anger, is the foundation of real masculine strength. Silence also creates contrast that women can't ignore. When you are present, responsive, and engaged, she felt the comfort of your attention. When you go silent, that comfort vanishes, and the contrast hits like a cold wind. It's in that contrast that she realizes just how much your presence mattered. Anger never provides this clarity because it's noisy and emotional. It blurs the truth with drama. Silence, however, strips everything bare. It forces her to recognize the difference between life with you and life without you. And in many cases, that realization doesn't dawn while you're silent. It dawns much later, when she looks back and realizes she lost the one man who wouldn't let her control his emotions. The brilliance of silence is that it allows you to preserve your dignity, even when everything else feels messy. Anger can make you look weak, desperate, or unstable. Silence never does. Even if inside you're wrestling with heartbreak or betrayal, silence keeps your exterior composed. And that composure is remembered long after the details of the conflict fade. Women don't talk about the man who shouted at them. They talk about the man who didn't flinch, the man who didn't beg, the man who walked away without a word. That memory carries weight because it represents the one thing she couldn't take from you, your control. And in relationships, control of yourself is the only form of power that truly lasts. So when we say silence hurts women more than anger, understand that it's not about cruelty, it's about clarity. It's about showing without words that you value your peace above her chaos. It's about teaching her, not through lectures or fights, but through absence, that your energy cannot be wasted. And it's about reminding yourself that your emotions are yours to master, not hers to manipulate. In a world where men are encouraged to chase, to explain, to overreact, silence becomes revolutionary. It sets you apart, it protects your soul, and it earns respect that anger could never secure. That's why silence is more powerful than anything you could ever say, because in the end, silence is the sound of a man who knows his worth.